Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 1766. The topic is training and the title is How to Strengthen Your Bench Press Lockout. Now today's podcast is going to be paired with a video, little teaching video we'll have on our YouTube channel. So you can check us out on YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. A client has been struggling with their bench press lockout, so I made that video specifically for two movements that I was adding to their program, and then I also wanted to make the podcast so that way we could kind of go over some other things that I've covered with that client and clients in the past who have struggled with bench press lockout. We're going to go through 5 tips today. The first 2 are technical tips on how you're performing the bench press. Then we have some programming and exercise selection tips. Okay, so the first tip, technique, is most often what you'll see when somebody is struggling to finish out their bench press. So they can get it off their chest pretty quick, and then it just kind of slows down and stalls out at the lockout. What you're going to commonly see are 2 technical components. So the first technical component is they lose mid-back tightness throughout the press. So as they're pressing up, they flatten out. What that means is if we have proper bench press technique, our mid-back is actually squeezed together. We're squeezing our shoulder blades together, and we should be kind of pushing our chest up into the barbell. We should push our chest up into the barbell on the way down and keep the chest pushed up as we're pushing the bar up. So your mid-back, the shoulder blades, should always feel like they're being squeezed together. What happens sometimes with people is when they press off their chest, they start to expand and open up their shoulder blades. That flattens out their chest, and it basically destabilizes the shoulder joints, and they don't have a nice strong anchor for the tricep and the chest to move. Basically, your rib cage, your chest connects to your rib cage. You're not going to lose your rib cage, but you do lose when you flatten out. You lose some of that stretch tension that was built up in the chest. So you actually do lose strength of the contraction of the chest. And then when your back flattens out and your shoulders kind of destabilize, you're going to lose that anchor for the tricep to contract off of. So in a sense, you're destabilizing the anchors for the chest and the tricep, so they're not going to be able to contract and create as much force. So the first tip is to make sure that you keep your mid-back squeezed and your chest pushed up as you're trying to push the bar up. Second technique tip is to not bounce the bar off your chest. You do see this happen with people, is they lower the bar down, even if they're in somewhat control on the eccentric, the lowering portion, they just kind of like tap the chest, and it's like a rushed, hurried fear out of the bottom, is they just come down, they tap, and then they try to hurry up and push, and it's just this panicky kind of pushed effort. The problem is they're not building the stretch tension of the muscles on the way down, and then really harnessing that stretch tension to get an explosive drive off the chest. So instead of like lightly tapping the chest and trying to rush and hurry out of the bottom of the press, we actually want to come down, keep our mid-back squeeze, keep the chest pushed up, set the bar on our chest, and then explode and fire through. So it should be like down, 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 pause, boom, explode. Not down, down, and it just like taps and hurry ups and tries to like run away from the chest. So you'll see people do that where they bounce the bar off the chest, or they hurriedly try to get out of the bottom of the press. And as odd as this is going to sound, the bottom of the press is where you're gathering your strength. It's where we have to kind of be comfortable because if we can stay in the bottom of the press, the bar touching our chest, we have our mid-back squeeze, the chest pushed up, you are harnessing and building so much tension, stretch tension in the muscle, that you're going to be able to explode the bar off your chest. So those are two technical things that we would want to make sure that we are correcting. Is don't flatten out as you try to press. Don't let your mid-back open up. And don't hurry out of the bottom. Don't bounce the bar off the chest. Set it on the chest and then explode in a big push effort. Okay. The next tip. It has to do with variations of the bench press that you can do that specifically help strengthen the lockout portion of the bench press. Now, the two that I like to use the most often are reverse band bench press and Spoto press. So reverse band bench press, we actually have a bench that my dad and I built in our gym that has reverse band benching capabilities. As far as I know, it's the only one in the world. It's pretty cool. Now, I have seen variations actually of Lilybridge family. They had a variation of one, but it didn't look as stable and as nice as ours. So, so I'm happy that we made ours like official and welded it up and got it powder coated and everything. But you can also, you don't have to have a fancy bench like we do. You can actually just bench press out of your squat racks and use the spotter arms, whether they're the half safeties or the full rack spotter arms, as your anchors above the bar to anchor the band down to the bar. This is what I do with my clients who don't train at Brutal Iron Gym. Is we use their squat rack or some capacity, something they got, where we can create that reverse band benching. So essentially, we're using bands. If you don't know what reverse band benching is, you can search for that on YouTube and you'll see people doing it. But there are like exercise bands that people will use for various reasons. You might have seen them for like scapular health, for like band pull aparts and some other things like that. But there are bands you can use, and you would anchor them from something above the bar. So in the normal bench press setup, you have to anchor them off of something roughly, 2 to more feet above the bar. And the band comes down under the bar and back up to the anchor. The idea of this is when you unrack the bar, you feel damn near all the weight that is on the bar. But as you lower the bar, the bands are going to absorb some of the weight load off the bar. So it makes the press easier at the bottom. But then as you press back up, the bands are unloading, so you're going to feel more and more and more of that weight back as you go towards the top of the press. So there are different band strengths. Some bands will deload 20 to 40 pounds. Some bands are going to deload 40 to 60. Some bands are going to deload 60 to 80, and then there's even more from there. But the idea of reverse band benching is it's an overload technique, meaning you're going to be able to lift more weight than you could normally. So if your normal 1 rep max, let's say, is 315, with bands, you could set it up to where it's 335 at the top of the press, but only 285 at the bottom of the press. What this does is this allows you to feel the heaviness of unracking 335 pounds, having to hold and stabilize 335 pounds. So 20 pounds over your max. Then as you would lower the weight down, it becomes under your max, so only 285. And then as you go to press back up, it's like you're pressing 285 off the chest, but throughout the lockout, it's getting added about 40 pounds is being added to the bar. So you actually have to push more explosively and harder than you normally would. So this forces the body to develop that ability to be explosive and strong throughout the lockout, as it would feel that the weight is getting heavier and heavier and heavier as you go through the lockout. So it's a way to isolate specifically the stress challenge of the heaviness of the lockout. So that way your body gets that stimulus, it adapts to the stimulus, and then all of a sudden when you move normal weight, 315 again, you've been practicing pressing and locking out at 335. So 315 is actually going to feel easier. So this is a way for you to use heavier than normal weight load. So it's an overload technique. Reverse band bench press. Great technique. The Spoto press. There was a world record holder of the bench press at one time named Eric Spoto. He was popular at that time because he would do the top 3/4 of the bench press. He would often lower the bar down but stay about 2 inches above his chest, and then he'd press back up. And he liked this because he said it really he felt that it really helped strengthen the pressing muscles because there was just constant tension on the muscles at all times. So he would do this for really high reps. I remember his warm-up, it would be like 135 for 20, 225 for 20, 315 for 20. Then he did like 405 for 10, then 495 for 5. And it was like, holy crap, dude, that's an insane amount of volume. And that was just his warm-ups. But he would do it with that Spoto press technique where he would stay 2 inches off the chest. This is great because it does keep that constant tension in the arms and all the supporting muscles. So it's almost like a bodybuilding effect in the barbell bench press, and it's going to help strengthen the triceps. The Spoto press is typically an underloaded variation, meaning you're probably not going to be able to do your 1 rep max in a Spoto press variation than you would without it, like in a regular variation. So you're going to use slightly underloaded weights, but it's going to be that constant time under tension. It's going to give that great growth stimulus, and it can really help strengthen the arms and the triceps. It does help strengthen the chest as well, but it's very tricep dominant movement. So those are 2 variations that if you haven't played with them before, they would really help strengthen your bench press lockout. The 4th tip we have is the accessories that you choose. So in the YouTube video paired with today's podcast, I show a cable crossover triceps extension exercise that I gave to the client who's been struggling with their bench press lockout. They freaking love it, but I wanted to show it in the video because it's kind of a unique movement. The idea is a tricep extension, but we're actually targeting the lower inner portion of the triceps. On our triceps, we have kind of that, what people call the horseshoe on the outside of the arm, which is kind of funny because it's not a horseshoe. It's just a big, like, lumpy muscle on the outside of the arm that looks really good if it's developed well. Then we have the long head of the tricep, which is the big meat of the tricep on the back of your arm. But then we also have this little head of the tricep, a little muscle of the tricep, on the inside of the arm down by the elbow. Specifically, that muscle of the triceps is extremely important in bench press lockout. So the cable crossover triceps extension basically isolates that small little one down by the elbow, and it's awesome for building bench press lockout. Now, if you can't do that variation, because it does require a specific type of cable setup, you can do a Tate press, which is named by Dave Tate, but it's a dumbbell variation, and again, you can search for that on YouTube. But a Tate press mimics kind of that similar position. It doesn't have as great of like constant tension, and the weight load profile is different than the cables, it isn't optimal compared to the cables, but it's still a very good exercise, especially if you've never done it before. It's going to be excellent stimulus because it'll be brand new. But a Tate press is really good. And then also just really heavy dips. Like super heavy, like 3 to 6 repetitions, somewhere in there. So you would do them typically loaded, like a weight belt you would have around your waist, and then you would add plates to that belt to make yourself heavier. But a very, very, very heavy weighted dips is a really good stimulus as well. So those are 3 accessories that you can try. If you don't currently, you can check out that YouTube video, look at the cable crossover tricep extensions. You can also look up Tate presses to see what those are. And then just think about doing really, really, really heavy weighted dips. The 5th tip we have is how often you would train your bench press, the frequency and intensity. When somebody's really struggling with bench press, I tend to give it to them twice a week. One session, we either focus on heavy weight, like really heavy singles or doubles, and a lot of them, so they can work on technique. Or we do an overloaded variation, which is something like the reverse band bench press, where you're moving heavier weight than you normally could. Then the other session, we do moderate straight weight. Maybe a couple sets of 3s, 4s, something like that. Maybe around like 85-ish%, 80, 85% of your 1 rep max. or we do an underloaded variation, which would be like the Spoto press. But the idea of that is we bench twice a week so they get to practice on the technique, but we also want to vary our weight load so we don't overly tax the recovery system of the bench press. To learn more about that, you can listen to podcast 966. You can find all of our podcasts on our website, www.brutalirongym.com. But podcast 966 is a training podcast titled Programming Concepts, Weight Load Selection, and Recovery Effects. So you do want to know that just annihilating the muscle as often as you possibly can isn't always the best approach. There is some considerations to be made with the weight load selections of the movements that you do. So you want to listen to podcast 966. Okay, so those are the 5 tips to help you strengthen your bench press lockout. Don't flatten out as you press up. Don't bounce the bar off your chest. Use some lockout specific variations like reverse band bench press and Spoto press. Use lockout specific accessories like the cable crossover tricep extensions, the tape press, really heavy dips, and make sure you're training your bench twice a week to get more practice at it than once a week. But don't annihilate the muscles. Try to use one heavy day and one moderate day, or one overloading variations day and one underloading variations day. Okay, if you want any help with programming, that's what I do. I can help you write programs specific for your needs. I can do video reviews, and then I do exactly what I did with this client is I just make exercises and write the programs exactly the way that's best for them. And if you want to learn about that service, you can check it out on our website, www.brutalirongym.com. If you have any questions, if you need anything, let me know. My email is brutalirongym@gmail.com. If you like the podcast, please share the podcast. If you like the podcast, please consider donating to support the podcast, which you can do on our website. Also, if you like the information we share in the podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels. You can find us and follow us on Instagram and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.